Well, good morning, everybody. I hate to break all this good fellowship up, but I guess we ought to go ahead and get started with our class this morning. So, while I was getting ready for this class, I was thinking about we're going to talk a little bit about those who trusted in the Hesed, and I was thinking about that and. Like I said last week, Hesed is not really easy to define using an English word. It doesn't perfectly fit any one English word, and so there's a lot of different things, a lot of different words that may be used for it. And of course, Hesed being a Hebrew word, we don't see it in the Bible. It's one of those words that has to be translated so that we can understand it in English, because most of us don't speak or read Hebrew. And so I was thinking about that, because it's something that's kind of hard to define in English. I wonder if we fully realize the meaning of it. And I got to thinking about last week, and I kind of wonder if I'm even able to express all of what it means. And so anyway, I wanted to at least just kind of give you a little reminder about Hesed before we move on. Because of all that, we said last time that Hesed is one of the best words for it we found was loving kindness. And in some versions, a lot of times it's just called love, which is tough because, like I mentioned last time, we have one English word for love, and that doesn't really give us a good meaning on some of this, because we can say I love my wife and I love my car, and that's two different kinds of love. Or I love this friend of mine, and totally different kinds of love. Yet in the English, it's all love. Well, that's the difference, though. There is a kind of love that you can love your car, but not in the same way you could love a person, and so that's part of. Yeah, well, some people do. Some people do. I could use anything. You can love whatever, your house. You can love anything, but it's a totally different kind of love than you have for your wife or for God or something like that. And so it's hard to. It's really hard to understand all that sometimes, being as we don't have more words to use for it. And going back to Hesed, some other words that will be used in the translation is loyalty, concern, and kindness. And he mentioned that Hesed always wants the best for you, even if you're not really worthy of it. Hesed still wants the best for you and looks out for you, kind of has your back. And God's always that way with us. He always has our back, and He's always looking out for us and wants the best for us if we're in covenant with Him. And so anyway, we're gonna go into look at some people who trusted in Hesed. And David, the author, he starts this out with a story, and I want to read this story to you. He said, during the Great Depression, a man was frantically looking for a job so he could feed his family. He heard of an opening in the telegraph office working for Western Union. So with hope in his heart, he rushed to the office. As he entered the outer lobby, however, his heart sank. In that office was at least 50 other men who had come seeking the same job. They all knew Morse code and were as qualified as he. Sadly, he took a number and went over to a corner and stood leaning against the wall. As he waited there in the crowd, he could hear the low murmur of men talking around him and the soft tap, 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 tap of someone in the inner office sending a message. Suddenly his mind began to focus on that tapping, and he started translating the message in his mind. It was saying tap, tap, to tap, if anyone, tap, 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 in the outer office, tap, 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 can hear this, then tap, 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 come in and you will have a job. In a flash, the man turned and ran into the inner office to find the boss tapping out the message on a steam pipe. Out of the 50 applicants, he got the job. The message was loud enough for everyone, but only he heard it. So in studying hesed and covenants as well, we might get the same feeling. The information's out there. It's not totally in the open, I guess, but the information's out there, and yet a lot of people never hear it. It's kind of interesting from this class. I've had several people tell me, this is kind of interesting because I've never heard this, and that's what interested me about this when Janine brought that back, and I started listening to this. I'm like, amazing! It's amazing that this isn't taught all over the place, because talking about covenants, it's like we said earlier in this study. It's sort of like putting on, like you can't see very well, and you put on a pair of glasses, and you start understanding a lot more once you do that. And so, we want to remember that when in covenant with God, He's basically bound Himself to us in covenant. And here in a few minutes, we're going to look at some reasons for that. But anyway, we want to remember God is always true to the covenant, and He'll never forsake us. Now, we tend to forsake Him sometimes, maybe. Yeah, Kevin?
There's another thought along that line, too, is that you may not understand the covenant or the command or the verse, what it's saying, or what, until the 15th time, 40 years later, you read it.
Right.
It's always interesting when something jumps on you. And you read it, I don't know how many times over the years, but it says something totally different to you.
Right.
Sometimes it takes some time.
It does. I've always said that's the neat thing about Scripture. It doesn't matter how many times you read it, you can still learn something. If you read it 1,000 times, you can still learn something from it. And so anyway, he says the covenant loyalty is freely offered to everyone who will hear and trust it. And it's kind of a shame that more of us or more people don't hear and trust all that, or if you don't have a chance to learn that, it's kind of a shame. And so anyway, we're going to take a look at just a few people who did understand it and what they did. So Moses is one that understood all this. He was in Psalm 103, it says, he made known his ways to Moses and his acts to the sons of Israel. So Moses was kind of a confidant to God. And, God spoke with him, and y'all tell me if I'm wrong, I think he was the only one that actually talked to God face to face. And God had to cover a little bit, but he's the only one that really talked to him face to face. And it says here about that face to face in Deuteronomy 34:10, since then no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all these miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and into his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And so y'all, I want to read that last line again, and y'all get this. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of Israel. So, if you think about it, it's kind of interesting. It says all that, and that was all true. But, Moses didn't start out like that. If y'all remember, when God first wanted him to take on this task, Moses kind of objected. He was like, well, they wouldn't listen to me, and I don't speak very well in public. And what would I say? And he just kept going on. And I think sometimes we're like that a little bit, when we know we're supposed to do something or need to do something, we might be a little hesitant and maybe a little afraid, don't feel like we're good enough. And so Moses, he kind of felt that way. But see, God kind of answered his objections, and he sends him to do this task anyway. And so we got to give him credit. Moses goes ahead, and he does appear before Pharaoh. And he says, he tells Pharaoh what God told him to say and did what God told him to do. And surprise, surprise, it worked. And so, but over time, Moses watches God at work. He sees how Moses deals with the Egyptians. and he sees that God can take care of it, and he gets a little more confidence in himself and a little more faith, and so by the time God delivers Israel from Egypt, or the hands of Pharaoh, Moses is truly a man of God. He's grown to that point, and he's able to lead the people out of Egypt. And he did have a few little minor details he had to take care of. If you'll remember, they were always asking, where are we going? How are we going to get there? What are we going to eat and drink? And so Moses would take care of all that for the people. And then it really got bad when they got to the Red Sea. And here comes Pharaoh, and he's after them. And so all the people are very upset and afraid and all that. And at this point, Moses is doing pretty good because he tells them, don't be afraid, the Lord will take care of this. And sure enough, the sea was parted and they were able to get through, and everything was taken care of because, God takes care of those who he's in covenant with. And so they were well taken care of. They didn't have to do a thing. God always says, "I'll take care of it," but He wants people to have a little faith. Kelvin.
I was reading last night, it was talking about Moses, and what did God have to do to Moses to get him to understand what he was supposed to do? He had to get himself out of his thinking and learn to rely on God. That's all he had to do, is quit worrying about how I was going to talk, how I was going to do this, how I was going to do that. And he had to trust God.
And sometimes that's hard to do.
It is.
And I mean, I face it in daily things that might seem simple to other people, but I've learned to go to God and ask Him to please help me and give me the courage to get through this part of my life or this task I'm trying to perform.
Right.
Which may require me speaking in front of other people. It frightens me. And for what? I don't know. I think it's afraid of making a fool out of myself.
Well, they say speaking in front of people is a lot of people's greatest fear. They almost fear it more than death. It's funny you talk about that. I can remember I was, and I've told this a long time ago, but some of you probably hadn't heard it. I was the type of person that would come in and sit toward the back of whatever, and I really appreciated and admired people who could get up and speak. I knew I was not one of them. There's just no way that I could ever do that. And I had a friend that really encouraged me and everything. And part of what he encouraged me about was what Kelvin was talking about. He kept telling me, let go and let God. Because I was worrying about this and that and worrying, all this kind of stuff going through my head. And it made it really, really hard. And I'd have to have it right here almost, to see what I was saying. I couldn't be looking up or anything like that too much, and it was really hard to keep the train of thought going correctly because I'm worried about all this stuff, and I still struggle with that a little bit, but I've done it enough that I kind of got used to it. And I always tell people, if you're afraid of public speaking, you just hadn't done it enough. Because I was afraid of it, and you do it over and over and over and over and over, and pretty soon it's not so.
Anything
Yeah,
in life.
it is.
If you want to get good at it, you do it over and over and over, and you're going to get good at it.
Yeah,
That's all there is to it.
right. That's what it takes. It is. Well, good. I appreciate those comments. Another one we're going to look at that understands all this is David. So, God promised in the covenant to always help and protect His people, and so, just a second, I'm getting my pages out of line here, and so, David, and y'all all know this story, but I want you to think of it in the context of what we're talking about. Here the Israelites are they know that God is going to take care of them and he's going to help them. And, that's awesome when you just put it that way, and it's kind of a theory. But then all of a sudden, at one point, the Israelites are looking over here, and here's the Philistines, their army, and most of all, there's Goliath. And so all of a sudden, this isn't theory, this is real life. And so they're across there looking at this big old guy, and he's just cursing at them and just saying horrible things, and he's making fun of the king and doing all this kind of stuff. And of course, they don't like it, and they're just looking for somebody just willing to go over there and fight Goliath. And in fact, Saul, he was kind of picking on Saul, and so Saul says, anyone who will go over there and fight Goliath can live in Israel tax-free. And that didn't do it. Nobody came. And next he says, anybody who'll go fight Goliath can marry my daughter, the princess. And still, nobody came. And then that night at camp, they're sitting there talking about what should be done and this kind of thing. And somebody says, well, why didn't God do something? Well, they didn't understand God was doing something. He was waiting for someone with enough faith to come along to be able to take care of this, because God likes to work with us. And so every morning for 6 weeks, God doesn't do anything. And the people are just wondering what's going on. And all it would have taken was for one man to understand the hesed of God, the loving kindness that he has, and that if someone just showed a little faith, that they would be able to take care of this. So finally, along comes David. And he's a very young man, about 16, and he's not real big. And but he's wondering why nobody goes out there and fights Goliath. And they're like, look at how big he is. He's a big old giant, and we can't beat him. And so David says, I'll do it. And of course, people say, well, David, you can't do that. You're just a young man, and you can't beat Goliath. And he said, no, I can. I'll go out there and do it. And so he walks out onto the field, and Goliath sees how small he is, and the Philistines laugh at him. And most people would be embarrassed. That'd be worse than public speaking. You'd be horribly embarrassed. This whole army's just laughing at you. But anyway, so David has some words here, and I'm going to read them, 1 Samuel 17, 45 through 46, and we'll see how he sees all this. David said to the Philistine, you come up against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. Okay, so y'all think about this attitude of David's. This little guy, young man, talking to this, I don't remember, how tall was Goliath? 7 or 8 feet or something, he's a huge person. Huh? 9? 9'3". That's hard to imagine somebody 9 foot tall. Yeah, right. And so he's looking at this huge person that everybody else is afraid of, and that's quite a bold attitude, to say what he just said. And the only reason David could be that confident is he fully understood covenant. And he fully understood Hesed. And he knew that God was bound, if he went out there and fought Goliath, God was bound to help him. God was going to help him, and God was going to take care of it. And he had just the kind of faith that was needed to get out there and take care of Goliath, where everybody else didn't. So next we're going to look at, those who understand today. So David says, he who understands the loving kindness of God understands the key. He knows that we need to walk by faith, not by sight. And basically God is waiting for someone to rest in him, to trust him, and then he'll make the move. He doesn't ask much of us. We just need to have some faith, and we just need to have some trust, and we just need to have a little confidence, and God will do great things. I love the way he put this in the book. I'm going to read this to you because I don't think I could word it nearly as well. He says, trouble forced the people of old to lean upon God's faithfulness. If they hadn't been thirsty, and y'all listen to this, if they hadn't been thirsty to the point of hurt, they never would have seen God's miracle of the water from the rock. If they hadn't been hungry to the point of hurting, they never would have seen the manna. If the Egyptians had not come upon them, they never would have seen the parting of the sea. If the Philistines did not come to crush them out of existence, they never would have seen God destroy a giant. And he also says sometimes God has to lead us to the wilderness to force us to try him and call on his loving kindness. And so y'all think about that. All those things that to the Israelites probably seemed horrible. They were hungry and thirsty and had all these problems. But because of that, God showed his ability to take care of them and to look out for them. And so today, he says if one man or woman can learn the principle of Hesed, that things like that can happen. If we just have some of that faith and confidence and all that in God, like some of these others we've looked at, that great things can be done for the kingdom. And so that's what he wanted to remind us of.
Nowadays, you have plans, you think, okay, I'm going to work at this job until I retire. You think that something happens and then you don't have that job anymore. That was God's will.
Right.
And you have to accept that that's God's will and move on, even though, you feel like my life is destroyed. But it's not. God has a better plan.
That's right. That's right.
You have to accept that your plan wasn't the right plan.
Exactly. Yeah, we ought to always say, Lord willing, I'm going to do this.
That's how I start my day.
Is it?
Dear God, help me turn my will and my life over to you. I say that as soon as I wake up.
That's good.
Every single morning, because I am not totally coherent when I wake up. I know that one, and I say it, and I really mean it when I say it.
Right. That's good. So next we're going to look at what the author calls superior covenant living. He says when a person entered into the covenant with God, he was never the same. Because all of a sudden, when you go into covenant with God, you're a very special person. Nobody should be able to say that you're not worth anything just because you're in covenant with God. It just turns you into something special. He even says God's considered the covenant child as the apple of his eye. And he said Old Testament, New Testament didn't make any difference. Covenant people are special people. 1 Peter 7, 9 through 10 tells us, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation of people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are a people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So this relationship is so special, we call it being born again. When one becomes a Christian, even the Jews called their proselytes one that was newly born. And Paul said of a new Christian that he is a new creature, and that when old things have passed, behold, new things have come. And so it's a very special thing to have the privilege of being in covenant with God. Once a person becomes a Christian, their life should change dramatically. And I know sometimes maybe it doesn't change as dramatically as we'd like, or it takes a little time. But he mentions here that, once we do that, once we become a Christian, we shouldn't be looking at those outside of the covenant. Maybe we see someone that has more than we do, someone that makes more money, or that they look better than us, or they have talents we wish they had, or something like that. And he says we should never do that, because there's nothing better than being special to God, than being in covenant with God. He said early Christians understood all this, and they gladly accepted that they had a higher calling from God. They were known for their unique lifestyles. There was a Christian from Athens named Aristides, and he wrote an explanation of the Christian way, and I want to read that to you. He said, "For they, the Christians, know and trust God, the creator of heaven and earth, in whom and from whom are all things, to whom there is no other God as companion, from whom they receive commandments, which they engraved upon their minds, and observe in hope and expectation of the world which is to come. Wherefore they do not commit adultery, nor fornication, nor bear false witness, nor embezzle what is held in pledge, nor covet what is not theirs. They honor father and mother, and show kindness to those near them, and whenever they are judges, they judge uprightly. They do not worship idols, made in the image of man, and whatsoever they would not that others should do unto them. They do not do to others, and of the food which is consecrated to idols they do not eat, for they are pure. Their oppressors they appease and make them their friends. They do good to their enemies, and their women are pure and virgins, and do not offer their wombs, and the men exercise self-control from every unlawful union, especially from impurity. And their wives similarly exercise self-control, so that they cling to the great hope of the world to come. They do not worship strange gods. They are gentle, moderate, modest, and truthful. They love one another. They observe carefully the precepts of God, and live holy and justly, as the Lord their God commanded them. They give thanks to him every morning and every hour for food and drink and other good things. If any righteous man among them dies, they rejoice and offer thanks and pray concerning him, and they escort his body as if it were setting out on a journey. But if anyone should die in his sins, they weep, since he goes to punishment." So that's pretty good. Everything he said there, that's pretty amazing. Do you know many people like that nowadays?
Robert,
Yeah.
I would like to read that definition of love that I was telling you about last Sunday.
Okay.
This is the best I've ever read. Actually, it's not love, it's love. A sense of feeling valued, understood, and heard, listened to, feeling safe with another, warmth in the heart, lightness of the body.
That's good. I like that.
I love it, because when I'm talking to somebody and they're listening to me, I do feel love.
That is good.
You can't say that about a car.
Right. Yeah, you can, but it's a whole different. You're actually expressing that point that it's a problem that we only have one word for love, because it should be a whole different love.
But if you will try to discover and learn, then you can understand the meaning of love, just like I found this definition.
Right.
And, some people, they just say, oh, I love you, but it's more of a habit than actually a true meaning.
Right.
But at the same time, isn't it important to understand the different definitions of love?
Yeah.
But this covers romantic love, parental love, friendship. This covers all the loves.
No, it doesn't.
No, I think that's why you have to have, or why you need different words for love, because of what you're saying, actually. You're talking about agape, that's the greatest form of love and all that. But that's a whole different thing from eros, which is romantic love, or phileo, which is friendship love.
But if I have a romantic love, I want them to listen to me.
Sure. Yeah, but that's a whole different love than some of the other loves. See, you're thinking.
I understand that just because I've learned it through life.
Yeah.
I think it was even discussed in some classes.
Right.
High school. But I know the difference.
But
The Bible even tells us love and money. So that's a different type of love.
Well, this one
See, I think you're actually making the point that it is a problem that English only has one word for love. You're like preaching it that
Well, then you know what? If you really want to change something, you can campaign, and next thing you know, poof, it's in the dictionary.
it might happen.
Yeah. I mean, they add new words every year.
So anyway, back to where we were. Y'all think about a lot of people nowadays. So someone gets baptized, and nowadays it's really tough. I think it'd be really tough on a new Christian because and thinking about everything we just read about how he said they were back then, it's really hard because there's a whole, and I'm sure it was hard back then too, but I think it's even harder nowadays because of all the the things we have, the communications and the television and the social media and all this kind of stuff. And so someone that's a brand new Christian that doesn't fully understand all this, it may take some time because it's really tough for them to suddenly change their life and quit doing all these things they used to do.
I don't think it's any tougher today than it was
It may not be.
in times, because today, nobody's busted the door down to arrest us and throw us in prison.
That's true. We don't have that. Yeah, you're right.
And so,
I agree with Kel.
Yeah.
so that whatever generation it is, whatever year it is, the devil's still at work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So anyway, going back to Israel, that was what God wanted from his people, is to act special, be better because you're in covenant with him, and to do the very best you could. It was so special to be part of the covenant with God that we talked about earlier, that sometimes he changed their names. Abram became Abraham and Sarah became Sarah. And, Jacob's name was changed. And Isaiah even foretold about a great renaming in Isaiah 56:5. It says, "To them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will not be cut off." And so because of this covenant fellowship, it gave people back then a good anchor to their faith, and knowing that God was obligated to them because of this covenant. He was bound to be loyal and merciful to them. And that's why we see an example, like we talked about David's boldness. I don't know, it would be hard for me to imagine being that bold, being in his position and all that. It'd just really be hard to imagine that. And maybe that's one of my shortcomings. But I think many people would have that one because that would be really tough. And also, we mentioned about Jacob. When he was wrestling with the angel, he said, "I'm not gonna let go until you take care of things here." And so anyway, in this new and better covenant, it's the same thing. We're in a privileged a position of honor with God. 1 Peter 2:9, "But if you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." And so, talking about renaming, it was God wanted to have a new name in the new covenant. He didn't rename each of us like back in the old sometimes, but we can read in Acts 11:26 the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch, and so that's a new name that at that time was a new name that everyone was very proud of, and we should be proud of being a new Christian. He says we're called by a new name because we're part of a new part of God's family, and he calls us his children. John 1:12 tells us, "Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." In Romans 8:17, "Now if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. If needed, we share in his suffering in order that we may also share in his glory." It what?
We are co-heirs with Christ.
Co-heirs with Christ, yeah.
What does that mean? We're up there with him
Right.
and becoming a child of God. So that's still hard to believe.
Yeah. I can remember a long time ago, reading that and thinking about that. It almost seems like, well, how can we be co-heirs with Christ? He's so far above us. It just almost doesn't make sense that we can be that. But I guess it's because we're getting what we don't deserve. Because we're in covenant with God, we get what we don't deserve. Christ may deserve it, but we didn't really. But he made us on that level. So he says that we are part of the new Israel. Romans 2:28 and 29. And he put a lot of scripture in here. And I debated on how many of these to read. But I thought, this is Bible class. So I guess it'd be okay to read some scripture in here, wouldn't it? So you know what it reminded me of? I heard a joke a long time ago that this congregation sitting here, and they're a very conservative congregation. And so this guy comes in that they've never met or anything, and he sits right down here in the front. And so they start preaching and going on, and pretty soon he's raising his hands, and he's like, praise the Lord, and just carrying on, doing all this stuff. And none of them are used to that. They're used to everybody sitting quietly and listening. And so after the service, one guy came up to him. He said, I just want you to know that we don't praise the Lord around here. And so, we want to be careful to not feel that way. So anyway, he said we are part of the new Israel. Romans 2:28 and 29 said, a man is not a Jew if he's only one outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a man is a Jew if he is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by written code. Such a man's praise is not for men, but from God. In Romans 9:6 and 7, it is not as though God's word had failed, for not all who descended from Israel are Israel, nor because they are his descendants are they Abraham's children. On the contrary, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. He says outside the covenant, there is no light. And so, if we're outside the covenant, we cannot expect to be in the light like the Bible refers to it. The Apostle Peter, and I'm about to read a verse here where he's talking about, he doesn't expect anything from people outside of the covenant of God. 1 Corinthians 5:11 through 13, he warned his brother in how to walk, then added, I wasn't talking about the outsider. What do I have to do with those who are outside? And the obvious answer is nothing. It is plain that Gentiles had no law. They were left on their own to do as well as they could. And I guess since I'm hearing noise out there in the hall, maybe we ought to stop right there. We're probably going to finish this study up next week. And so anyway, I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate y'all's attention. So we'll see you next week. You're welcome.
4 bars.
I've got to close the door. No, nobody called me.
You're supposed to just,
Yeah.
I'll do it. Just,
Look,
I'll do it
turkey,
just for
you turkey.